So again, I am Crystal Donovan, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking to you about engagement through an intersectional framework. This didactic was actually rescheduled. So been in plans for over a year, but it actually falls during the 20th National LGBTQ Health Awareness Week. And so while it's important, I wanted to highlight that there's some really good information on the website. And so hopefully, as we have this conversation today, that this will just be the beginning of many, many conversations in the future. So in regard to culture and psychosis, I was listening to a webinar with Dr. DeLuca, and he said something simple, but yet profound. He said, culture and psychosis are intertwined. And essentially, it was a reminder that people living with psychosis are not a monolith, that people living with psychosis have many identities. And so we want to think about how we can meet people where they are and affirm that whole person. According to some of our colleagues from On Track New York, culture plays an important role in gender and sexuality. And so, of course, issues regarding sexuality and gender are going to come up on a regular basis when you're working with individuals living with psychosis. And gender and sexuality develop across the lifespan. So when you think about individuals that are in coordinated specialty care programs, they're going to be individuals that it's all part of normative development to have questions, for there to be some confusion, for there be exploration, and again, changing needs over time. We do want to talk about the real impact of stigma and discrimination. And there's just maybe 3 slides. We're going to briefly talk about suicide attempts. So when we're talking about the impact of stigma and discrimination, according to the Trevor Project, 42% of LGBTQ plus youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. The Trevor Project then broke that down by race. We're looking at 12% of white youth. We're looking at 21% of Latinx, multiracial, and Black youth, 12% Asian, Pacific Islander, and over 30% for Indigenous youth. And again, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, wanted to really stress that there is no evidence that the risk for mental illness is inherently attributable to one's identity. They're specifically talking about being transgender and gender diverse. I also would say in regards to being gay, bisexual, and anyone else as part of the LGBTQ plus community. Oftentimes, what you're seeing is an internal conflict between one's appearance and identity. Also, we want to acknowledge the low access to healthcare providers, and that would be all healthcare providers. Again, if we're thinking about holistic care, those would be our primary care providers, as well as our mental health providers as well. And then also the discrimination, stigma, and social rejection that often happens to these young people. So when we're talking about gender affirming care, I want to stress that no one, should say no one, most of us on this call are not prescribers. Right? So there might be a handful of individuals that are actually providing medication. So when we talk about gender affirming care, oftentimes that should just align with the work that's already happening. Again, we think about meeting people where they are, being person-centered, and recovery focused. So according to the American Psychiatric Association, gender affirming therapy, and I would say gender affirming care, is a therapeutic stance that focuses on affirming a patient's gender identity and does not try to repair it. Again, specifically talking about transgender and non-binary youth and young adults that receive support in the change of legal documents around their name, their gender marker, reported lower rates of suicide. I recognize that in coordinated specialty care, many programs start at 15 or 16, and so may not actually be supporting that when there needs to be others involved, but we can still explore. We can still explore what does that mean for them. Just like if you were talking to a 15-year-old that wanted to get their driver's license, for example. So exploring action steps, what needs to be done for this to happen. In regards to respecting pronouns, all of us can do that for all individuals, regardless of their age. And also when you're thinking about pronouns and names, thinking about the role that your electronic health record could play. And I did think it was interesting. I'm one of those people, like, again, I want to honor all the disciplines that are on the call. And so I was looking up different statements in regards to affirming care. I know what my professional organization says, but I went and looked up almost everyone else's, if I'm going to be honest, because it's important, because LGBTQ youth who have access to spaces that affirm their sexual orientation and gender identity reported lower rates of attempting suicide. The one that stood out for me, it was clear, it was concise. According to the National Association of Peer Supporters, their statement, it was so good, I couldn't paraphrase it, so I'm gonna read it to you. As peer support specialists, we have the obligation to affirm and support the ability of each person to create a meaningful life for themselves, including access to gender affirming care without threat of investigation or harm. We also have the obligation to stand opposed to harmful systems and requirements, such as those in the letters when promoting support. So again, clear and straight to the point. After I read that statement, it made me think about someone, and Adilsa Fernandez, I'll be honest, I followed Adilsa on Twitter. Adilsa Fernandez is a huge peer advocate, and they talked about their experiences with early psychosis. Adilsa was in college, and they talked about access. So they had access to counseling services, but they said they were constantly being questioned about their gender and sexual identity. They also talk about having to explain racism and what it means to be Latinx. And according to Adilsa, in that space, there was no healing. So what was helpful to Adilsa, again, was the peer community. They said it was peer supporters that wrapped themselves around them. They provided them practical techniques, such as listening to music, grounding practices, and ultimately, Adilsa graduated magna cum laude. So action steps. I want to be able to leave you with action steps. Action steps are my favorite. Shared decision-making. Shared decision-making is a huge part of coordinated specialty care. So again, not necessarily looking at doing anything different. And really, with anyone, want to empower the participant to take an active role in the decision-making process. When we go back to our electronic health record, thinking about that more and more individuals are having access to their case notes. So just thinking about the language used in those notes. I wrote front desk because I worked in outpatient mental health for a long time. And the front desk individuals, those were typically the individuals that knew everyone. And that is where people kind of came in. And that is where affirming care can actually start. And I remember a couple situations where a case manager and their supervisor simply had a conversation with the front desk staff with the participants' permission, but just let the front desk know that there had been a name change. Maybe there had been a pronoun change. Just, oftentimes that maybe the name hasn't been changed legally, but that the name was also added to that other place. And it was amazing because the front desk staff felt so like included in the care for one, but were happy to have that information because they don't want to accidentally out anyone. They want to be a safe place. And then again, in regards to names and pronouns, so whether that's in a therapeutic session, case management, supported employment, peer support, honoring that person's name, honoring that person's pronouns is ultimately going to help build that relationship so that we can increase that engagement and retention. And then also just looking at your physical environment. When I walk in a building, I look at the pictures on the wall. I look at the pictures. I look at the artwork. I want to see if there's anyone that looks like me, or at least anyone I can relate to. So think about some of the visual cues that you have in your organizations, in your offices, any participant-centered space. Do you have gender-neutral restrooms? Is that something to have a conversation about? Actually, where I am sitting right across the hall, there is a restroom that it looks like initially it was about accessibility and then just expanded that to now it's simply gender neutral. And then also thinking about educational materials and then any interpretation services that you might use and just start exploring if they're also sensitive to LGBTQ plus issues. Training and education, many people are moving away from simply a diversity, inclusion training, really focusing on that cultural humility, which includes that piece where all of us really get in the mirror and start doing some self-evaluation. Also, potentially looking at, some people need something tangible, looking at a cultural formulation. You might ask, what is a cultural formulation? It's simply a supplement. So it's not a new, it doesn't replace the assessment, but it can help really bring it to focus in regards to cultural identity, cultural explanations of illness. It also can help that clinician and participant relationship. And it has been found in other marginalized groups to facilitate reasoning, to help with decision making, and ultimately can lead into a more enhanced and can enhance your diagnostic clarity. Just some everyday interventions. So something that could be simple, involvement of key supporters. So we know individuals in coordinate specialty care programs, when they have loved ones involved, they simply have better outcomes, they're able to meet their goals, they're able to be more successful in the community. We do want to acknowledge that those key supporters might not be biological family. So again, really want to identify the people that are important to the participant. Team participation in community events, and that can be whether that's in person, virtual. There's an LGBTQ center in Cleveland. There is Kaleidoscope in the Columbus area. And these are simply social centers. These are places where people not always just focused on medication, therapy. It's a place where people can be in community and they can feel safe and they can feel welcome. And then also looking at time and space that you already have dedicated to supervision. So most people are either a supervisor or a supervisee. So using that space to talk about potential stigma and discrimination and how that can be addressed within your system. We were talking about this right before we got on to the echo. It's been a couple weeks, some of us participated in a conference, and Amanda LIPP was there. And she is a filmmaker doing some amazing work with coordinated specialty care programs. Amanda is a gay woman, and Amanda is someone that lives with mental illness. And again, Amanda said something that was simple but still so profound. coordinated specialty care is not a one size fits all model. And so hopefully there were many things that you were able to get out of the presentation, but if nothing else, really signifies the importance of listening to people with lived experience. And this is my information. Don't hesitate to get out if you want to have more conversation or if you have any questions. Thank you for your attention. And this is the end of my presentation.